I'll start this by saying please watch the full video before jumping to conclusions on my points. It's a winding path, but I think it's an important one with good ideas to explore. With that said, enjoy this long-awaited deep dive into the Darth Jar Jar theory. Popular fiction, particularly that rising to the level of myth, can best be thought of as public dreams from the collective unconscious. This idea was brought to light by Joseph Campbell, scholar of hero myths and inspiration for George Lucas's creation of Star Wars. Hero myths and other legends are tales constructed to inspire, guide, teach, and answer the big questions of life. Start with the assumption that humans naturally create a wide variety of stories. If a human can imagine it, it's possible. Now, how do we determine which stories will persist as a cultural myth? The answer is simpler than you may expect. It comes down to natural selection, like biological natural selection. If you start with 10 random stories, some will be spread while others will be forgotten. People naturally spread the stories that impact them most, so over time the most poignant stories grow to the level of legend, defining the cultural values of the time, shifting and adapting to take their form. This can happen with any story, but now we'll focus on Star Wars. The original Star Wars movie was released on May 25, 1997. It touched the emotions, hopes, and fears of the era, connecting with people on an almost spiritual level and thus becoming a massive pop culture icon. It was followed up by The Empire Strikes Back, another wildly successful film in its time, only growing in popularity since its release. Then came Return of the Jedi, a heartwarming, dramatic, and cathartic conclusion to the trilogy, solidifying its place in the public consciousness. Then came the prequels. For many, particularly the younger fans, it was a joyous trilogy rivaling the experience of the originals. For many others, particularly the older fans, it was a sudden decline in the quality of Star Wars storytelling. And worst of all to the naysayers was Jar Jar Binks, a silly creature with slapstick humor and unrelatable antics. Some saw his existence as decreasing the overall intellectual and emotional quality of the Star Wars mythos, yet others resisted this idea. Many Star Wars fans, either from a general love of the prequels or a dedication to good faith from the original trilogy, opposed this notion that Jar Jar had ruined Star Wars. I would argue that they're correct. Jar Jar did not ruin Star Wars, and while he is by no means a perfect character, he did add significant moments to justify his existence in the story. I have numerous videos on this topic already, and more are on the way, all with standard story-based explanations to Jar Jar's purpose within the bigger picture. But here's where things get interesting. Many people love the prequels and tolerate or like Jar Jar, but they can't explain why. Often the impact of stories hits us on such a subconscious, fundamental level of emotion and reasoning that we don't even realize it ourselves. This leaves us in a position where we strongly believe in the quality of a mythic story, but we can't explain why. Enter the Darth Jar Jar theory. People who love the prequels but take issue with Jar Jar Binks face a strong cognitive dissonance. If the story of the prequels feels so powerful and good, how can it include such a poorly developed character whose silly antics only detract from the story? Watching my series analyzing The Phantom Menace in detail, I hope you're able to find the real textual conclusion for this. Jar Jar isn't that poorly written as people make him out to be. He isn't a relatable hero. He's a warning about the dangers of not improving oneself. He's a parable of ignorance and low self-esteem, and how those factors are risky enough to destroy a galactic civilization. Most people process this information without even realizing it, leaving the movie with only a vague sense that Jar Jar isn't as bad as his detractors make him out to be, but not exactly knowing why. The Darth Jar Jar theory fills this hole. It's the equivalent of people saying, Jar Jar is an annoying, clumsy fool, but Star Wars is good, so Jar Jar couldn't possibly be what he appears to be. The conspiracy theory springs from this, using confirmation bias to seek out any shred of evidence to support the predetermined conclusion. The theory makes a compelling case for itself, presenting many examples with supporting evidence, all cherry-picked in support of the conclusion. I could make a whole video examining each point of evidence, but to keep it simple, I'll give one example. One Darth Jar Jar theory video claims he stands next to Palpatine at Qui-Gon's funeral and he can be seen smiling, indicating he's pleased by Qui-Gon's death and he has a close relationship with Palpatine. Going in with the assumption that Jar Jar is secretly a Sith mastermind or has some great importance, of course all this evidence appears. but it's far more reasonable and likely to assume that Jar Jar standing next to Palpatine was sheer coincidence, and the slight twitch of his mouth likely from sadness rather than happiness. Anyone can see anything if they seek out the evidence to prove a conclusion rather than to disprove it. As proof of this, it doesn't take much digging to find counter-evidence indicating the theory to be unlikely. The most prominent example of this is Jar Jar inadvertently stepping in animal dung as he walks around on Tatooine.
This is very, very bad. Oh! Go!
No one of any importance is around to watch him do this. It's not a show, it's just something he does by mistake. He's either not a Sith Lord, or he's the worst Sith Lord I've ever heard of. Now, I'm not trying to bash the Darth Jar Jar theory or oppose a group of die-hard believers. I understand it's just a meme, it's just an internet joke, a fun thing for people to speculate about for a good laugh. But its staying power is what really fascinated me. Like Jar Jar himself, the Darth Jar Jar theory has more than meets the eye. This modern expansion of myth is a perfect microcosm for how legends develop, grow, and adapt to their cultural environment to fill new niches in the public consciousness. And for that reason, despite its unconvincing claims, I welcome it, as one small part in the ever-growing story of humans seeking meaning and inspiration in this wild universe, from their favorite galaxy far, far away. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this deep dive interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and leave a comment below with your thoughts on today's topic. And as always, think critically, be creative, and have a great day.